Kathryn Strachan, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have you. I've been following you and Copy House for so long, and basically watching what I feel is like a stratospheric rise from, I think you started the business in 2019 to where you are now. I think probably a great place to start would be, right back at the beginning. You are one of the leaders in content marketing, particularly in the tech space. How did you even get into starting Copy House and into content marketing?
I would say by accident. I mean, my marketing career, I started actually because when I first moved to the UK, I wasn't allowed to work. I wasn't allowed to have a job because of the visa I was on. So I was a dog walker around Angel Islington area. One of my very first clients was the vice president of marketing from Yelp. So after 2 years of watching her dog, she invited me to come into the office as a marketing assistant.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
This was probably 8-9 years ago now, but she invited me to come into the office, and in the team there was a copywriter, and I thought it was a really cool job. So I kind of ended up in content marketing by accident because of that. And then at the time I was doing 2 degrees in English Lit, so I finished my master's in modern lit from UCL. And after I left my master's, started to think about my career and what I wanted. So I started as a copywriter, and I was working for Lloyd's, so Scottish Widows, which is part of their retirement section, working as a copywriter and writing really technical content. So technical content's always something that we've done, always something that I've done. It goes all the way back to when I was in university and writing complex theories of time and Alice in Wonderland and all sorts of really interesting essays on topics that most people didn't want to touch or weren't interested in. And that was really where we found our niche. So we set up in 2019, but I only started hiring in January 2020, which, as you can imagine, was not a very good time to start hiring because 2 months later, we had the pandemic, obviously. When the pandemic happened, we were doing lots of different things. So we were doing travel and recruitment, and we were doing things, across all industries. And these industries were really quite heavily hit. But I didn't want to furlough anybody or make anybody redundant. So I looked really hard at what we did and what we did well. And I saw that we did a lot in technology, and we particularly excelled at communicating complex messages to the audience in a way that the audience is going to understand. So we niched down hard and really heavily invested in our marketing. I got the bounce back loan and spent all of it investing in our marketing and building our brand awareness. And I think our marketing manager was maybe our 5th hire, which was a really early hire because most agencies especially don't bring in marketing managers until much later on in the journey and don't think about their marketing until,
if at all, service-based businesses. I know 50-person companies have only just hired a marketing manager.
Yeah, completely. And go for years based on word of mouth and recommendations and referrals. But when I started the agency, I didn't come from an agency background. I didn't come from, I didn't have a little black book of clients that I was bringing with me. So it was built completely from the ground up. The only way to really build a company from the ground up and get good momentum is with marketing. I mean, you need to increase your share of voice. It's helpful. And I think a lot of agencies probably don't invest in their marketing right away because they already have some share and voice. They already have some awareness because people maybe know them from their previous roles. They kind of have those relationships. So that's enough to drive business at the beginning. But when you don't have any of that, you really have to think about how you're going to drive inbound leads and how you're going to create deals. And the only way to really do that is with marketing. So we invested really heavily in our marketing. Brought in a marketing manager. I mean, the marketing manager we brought in at first was far too senior. I think a lot of brands make this mistake. They just want the best people for their company. So they go with really senior people. But the problem with senior people is that they often want to just do the strategy and not the actual
Tactics.
Doing. So I definitely, made a mistake with the first marketing manager because she was far too senior. But then the second time I hired a marketing manager, I hired somebody who was more mid-level, who really could do a bit of strategy, but could do a lot of the implementation. That kind of set the foundation for all of our growth. So having that strong foundation then allowed us to really skyrocket from there. So, I mean, we were officially established in 2019, but we've only really been going since 2020, and we've grown from just myself to 25 full-time employees, 26 if you count Oscar,
who sat on your lap.
Who sat on my lap and is a mini dash hound who's 9 weeks old, and we've dubbed our marketing director.
I love he's so chief marketing director. He's so sweet. He's so sweet. I want to go back to you were saying there about hiring. This wasn't something I was going to talk about, but these things are so fluid, right? One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is literally like just talking to another founder and having like a really interesting conversation about how they scaled their business and like everything in between. One of the things you said there was a lot of people make the mistake that they hire people who are too senior because they want the best of the best. And actually, at the beginning stage of your growth, you do need that strategy. But most importantly, you just need people who can get shit done. How did you figure that out, first of all? But secondly, how did you kind of change course once you recognized that that was an issue? Because I feel like I was really lucky in that I took one of my team members from my old employer who I'd worked with already. So she got it. Like, she was down for startup life because she knew what it was going to be like, and she'd already worked for me, and she's our marketing manager now. But I imagine there's a lot of startup founders who have exactly the issue you have, which is, I've got this really amazing idea. I want to build this incredible company. We need the creme de la creme, and then continue to make like bad hires, basically.
Yeah, I think hiring is probably one of the hardest parts about scaling, especially a service-based company that is based entirely on people. I mean, the first marketing manager that I hired, she actually told me, well, after about 6 months of working there, when she was quite frustrated because I wanted her to do more of the doing and less the strategy, and so she ultimately handed in her notice. But when she did, she kind of had a really honest conversation with me about needing somebody who was more mid-level. And, I've always been particularly good at listening to the team. So I took that on board, and I was like, yeah, I mean, she's probably right. I can see that for sure. So the second time that I hired somebody who was much more mid-level. And I mean, our needs change. And that's the thing as well about a startup, is your needs change as you grow. And if you're growing quite quickly, it means that your needs are constantly changing. So the next marketing manager we had for probably about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. And she was much more digitally focused, but wasn't big on events and in person. And at the time that was totally fine because it was during the pandemic, everything was online, that was aligned with what we needed. And then when she left, we hired somebody who was much more event focused, which is much better aligned for where we are now, because we need, we do in-person events. We probably do at least one a month, but we're doing events in New York as well as London. And, we really need that expertise. It's not expertise that we have on the team. I think one of the best ways to do it is to look at who you have internally as well. So, we have a lot of copywriters, obviously. So, the copy team can contribute to our marketing. So we perhaps don't need a marketing manager that can write copy, but we don't have anybody on the team who can do events. So, having a marketing manager who is really strong on events is a good way. So looking at the skills that you have, thinking about, especially in startups, you have to be quite scrappy. So thinking about what you have, what you don't have, and where that need is. I mean, I remember at the beginning, if somebody left, I used to get so upset about it because I was I'd get so attached to them. But then what I realized was that every time that it's that saying, every time one door closes, another door opens. And every time that somebody's left, even if I really like them and they've done a great job, it's normally an opportunity to reset and refresh and really think about what we need at this stage, and who would be a good replacement. And quite almost always it's never a like for like. And it's thinking about where the organization is now, but also where it will be in a year or even 2 years, because you need to think further ahead. Most of the hires you make will probably stay for at least a year, if not longer. I mean, it's really hard, especially I think at the beginning, before you have any brand awareness, to find people who are a good match for the organization. My head of ops, who I talk about a lot because he's helped me build the agency. I hired him. He was my third hire as a part-time project manager. I hired him the week that the pandemic happened, and he was the only person who showed up for the interview because the pandemic was happening. And I had just found out that our account manager was not really going to be able to work very much. She had 3 young children at home, so had just asked to reduce her hours. And I was like, can you do account management? He's like, just tell me where you need me, let's go. And he's always had that attitude. So I mean, he started as a part-time project manager, and then became full-time project manager, and then senior project manager, and is now our head of ops, and will become our managing director because he's doing a lot of that role already. But finding somebody who is really excited about growing something, and you need to look for that mentality of previous experience like building something from the ground up, because it's very different whether it's marketing or processes or systems or account management to build something from the ground up than to come into something that's already existing. So, you know, to come in and do marketing for a company that already has brand awareness is a very different kettle of fish than literally building it from the ground up. And there are people out there who get really excited about that. So like, you know, my head of ops has been with me since like pretty much day one, and, you know, acts like he owns it as well. So feels that like sense of responsibility because we've raised the company together, really. So it's that mentality, which I think is really hard to find, and is harder to find. Like the smaller you are, the harder it is to find.
I think there's a special type of person who wants to work at a startup, right? They're the kind of person that want to look in the eye of the hurricane and like walk into it and not like try to turn around and like drive back the other way.
Yeah.
And I think that little, you can find skills. Like there are plenty of really talented people out there in the world, and loads who could do the job that like I'm hiring for right now. I've got 2 jobs I'm looking for, but it's like that little bit of like, it's almost like a craziness that you need to be like, I thrive in chaos. And actually, you know, you said it perfectly well there. I want to help raise something. Not everyone wants to help raise a business. Some people do just want to plug in and play. And like, we need people like that too, particularly at probably the stage that you're at right now, which is 25 people. You need plug in and players because that's what's going to get you to the next stage of growth. But certainly I found in the first 4 years of business, it's like, we need eye of the storm people. We need people who will look at the chaos and be like, I got this, and not like be like, oh wait, but like all the systems aren't in place yet. Yeah, because they've not been invented. Help us invent them.
And it's really difficult to find people like that because most people aren't like that.
I know.
Yeah, especially when it's not their company.
I was going to say normally the ones that are running their own business. So yeah, you need people who have that kind of entrepreneurial bit, but maybe don't want to do the thing like lead gen, or like, you know, they don't know how to close a sale or whatever, but they bring something else completely different to the table. I love that you shouted out your head of ops because like you know, operations was the thing that I didn't even think about, because, you know, this is my first agency experience too, right? Is running my own thing. And I didn't realize how important operations was until it all started falling apart.
Yeah. And it's perhaps the thing that I'm the worst at. So, I mean, one of the things that I've always done is look at like what I do well and what I don't do well, and bring people in to kind of take that off. So, I mean, I've always had a mentality of trying to make myself redundant in the business and, you know, dividing out my tasks. So, you know, at the beginning it was having another copywriter who could, you know, do some of the work for me. And it's harder when it's things that you like identify with, like our content director, when he came in, you know, up until that I had been doing like the content director role really. And I've been like overseeing the creative team and like setting the direction and like the vision. And it was really hard to like hand that over. It's much easier to hand over something that, you know, you're not good at. So like having somebody do your finances, because I suck at math. Okay, that's a good
Easy
idea.
win,
But like when you identify as something, try like having to change how you see yourself, to give somebody else a room to kind of come in and grow is really difficult. So that was a really hard hire, because I had to change who I was and how I identified as myself, and, you know, let go of the copywriter content director like mentality. You know, I now haven't written anything in probably about 2 years. So since you started, I've not written a single thing for our clients or done any content strategy or anything like that.
And how does that make you feel? Because I feel like when you do run a service-based business, particularly in the marketing space, right? So like content, personal branding, you know, there's lots of crossovers between both. And we'll get into personal branding later because that's how I discovered you, was through your personal brand on LinkedIn. But I feel like when you're really good at something, and that's often how service-based businesses start, right? You're really good at something and then you start a business in that thing because people want to pay you to do that thing for them. It can be so easy to fall into this ego trap of like, well, I'm the best at that in the business. So like, I still need to make sure that I'm, you know, QCing everything and like making sure everything's of a certain level, and like, oh, but that's not how I would do it. Here's how I would do it. But actually that might get you so far and make sure that everything is of a certain standard, but it's never going to allow the people who you've hired to help you grow. How did you get through that?
And you can't scale like that. So I used to do that. I mean, at the very beginning, I used to like review absolutely everything that went out the door, but you can't scale like that. I
Mm.
mean, we write hundreds of blogs every week now. Like, could you imagine if I was still trying to like review all of that?
Go insane.
Yeah, I mean, I'm busy enough as it is. I don't know how I would possibly do it. So I mean, it's not only letting go so that other people have room to grow, but letting go so that the business can grow, because you can't grow if you're stuck in the middle of it.
Do you think a lot of businesses fail to scale because of that? Like they scale to the point at the level of which the founder's willing to like let go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the person that we had in the role, like before, our content director, like I'd got him, he was like my first hire as like a junior copywriter, and I had taught him like everything that I knew. But what I didn't realize was that like I only knew so much. And so then he could only like really support the team as much as I could, which in and of itself was limiting. Where like when we brought in our content director, he had 20-30 years experience, so it was far more experience and than I was, and could take us far further because of it, and could really settle the creative team, and creative teams can be difficult to settle sometimes, and yeah, it can really like help nurture and support and grow them, and help us create really good content. So I mean, it's limiting if you're in it because you only know so much. And I mean, probably the best thing you can do is hire people who know. I mean, they say it all the time, and I know it's cliche, but to hire people who know more than you do, and then to trust them to get on with things, which is sometimes that trust is difficult, especially if you've been burnt before. And definitely made plenty of bad hires, and I've definitely been burnt by employees before. And I mean, you all have been. If you are hiring and building a team, it's only a matter of time before somebody lets you down. It's not possible that it's never gonna happen. But
I also think on that though, like no one comes to work and wants to do a bad job. I always do think though that people are people, and I think if it's not working for you, it's not working for them, and if it's not working for them, it's not working for you. And sometimes I feel like, particularly right now on social media, there is this narrative of like toxic employers and toxic employees, and like all these buzzwords surrounding like bad apples, if you like. And actually, someone can be not right for your organization and let you down and not rise to the occasion for you, but might be amazing somewhere else. And I feel like the biggest lesson that I've had over the last like 18 months particularly is recognizing that and being like, actually, and that's okay. Like we don't have to, you don't have to work here, and like we don't have to, like, it's, and not in an arrogant way, just in like sometimes it's like with relationships, right? You might have a friend that you've had for a certain period of time, and you grow apart, or like it doesn't work out, or like your values change and theirs don't, or like whatever it might be, and you no longer have that person in your life. I feel like employment's quite similar, and unless it's giving you that mutually beneficial relationship, then there's no point in like both of you coming to the table,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the biggest learnings was as well that like you're just part of somebody's journey.
Yeah.
Like, the chances that you're going to hire somebody and they're going to stay forever
It's like no.
is like slim to none.
Yeah.
But
But so many founders think that though.
Yeah, they
like
really do.
They really, and they take it really personally when people hand their notice in.
I cried the first few times like people handed in their notice.
But I suppose that's a good thing on one hand, because I feel like it shows that you care.
Yeah.
Like there is like, I hate when people go, don't take it personally, it's just business. It's like, of course I'm gonna take it personally. It's my business. Like this isn't like just my career, this is my life. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Of course I'm gonna take it personally. But
it's
yeah,
hard to feel like they're not like leaving you. But,
and rejecting you as a person.
Most people don't see jobs like that, especially these days. I mean, our grandparents used to have, lifelong careers, but I don't know anybody who's a lifelong career in any organization these days. I mean, sometimes you meet people who've been there for 5-7 years, but I mean, when I meet somebody who's been at a job for like 7 years, I'm like, wow, that's a really long time, because that is, in this day and age, is an incredibly long time. So I mean, it's more thinking about you being as part of their journey, and just, I mean, hoping that they leave better off, having learned something or like gotten an experience that they wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. And that's one of the best things about owning a business and running a business, is you really can create those opportunities for people. So, we've expanded a lot into the US over the last year. And one of the things that we do a lot of events in New York. So our marketing manager, I brought her to New York in November. It was the first time she'd ever been to New York. And she was like over the moon to go to Trader Joe's and like see all these brands. But like, it wasn't an opportunity that, she probably would have had elsewhere.
Certainly at a bigger company, that would never have happened.
Yeah. So, I mean, she was so happy to be in New York, which was really cute. But yeah, I mean, you can create opportunities for people. But yeah, I mean, almost nobody's there forever.
Yeah, and I think that's not a bad thing either, because I think the when you have, you need a core team of people that you trust, and I don't necessarily mean that on a personal level, because trust means different things to different scenarios, right? Like, I trust that you're not going to hit me with your car when driving down the road, but like, and like, I trust that you're like, you know, your husband's not going to like cheat on me and like all that kind of stuff. But with your team, you have to trust that they're going to execute what they're, you know, mean to execute. And I think this kind of comes full circle to this whole concept of like treating your team like a family. And I'm very anti that concept, because I feel like it really does like create this narrative around like, you have this is an unconditional relationship, and actually it's very conditional on me being a good leader, you being a great employee, and you feeling like you're remunerated fairly for like the value that you're bringing to the table, and vice versa. There are conditions around that. No one's sitting their mum down being like, right, mum, you haven't performed very well this quarter, like we need to talk about your bonus. Like, no one does that, and if you did, you'd probably get a slap. And so I think this whole thing of like taking those moments personally, which I definitely did, like I've definitely taken things personally before, and I think, as we said earlier, like it's only natural when you deeply care about your business and about the people within it. However, it is a business, it's not a family. And I think reframing that for me anyway has been, it's like almost taking the emotion out of it, but still deeply caring. Like, you know, Sam's in the room with us now. Like, he's an amazing video producer, and he's been with the company for what, 3 years now, nearly 2.5. Like, I am consciously aware that if he doesn't keep developing, like I'm sure there's going to be, you know, other things that he wants to go and do. I'll be proud that he's spent that time at Clout. Whereas if, you know, 1.5 years ago, I might have been like, oh my God, how dare you leave me? You know?
Yeah. Well, I think it's more thinking about it as like a community, you know,
I love
a village that comes together to achieve a greater goal, rather than being a family. And I mean, within communities, people can replace each other. So, you know, you need maybe a doctor in a community who,
and
like,
as that grows, you need a new hospital, and
but
like,
it doesn't have to
that.
be that specific person that is a doctor. You know, it could be anybody who has that skill set and can contribute to like the values and the vision of the community. It doesn't have to be like whoever that specific person is. So you need roles within organizations, but you know, the people who sit within those roles can change. But I think trust is quite a difficult thing, especially when you're remote working. And I see a lot of brands now like forcing people back to the office because they don't trust that they're being productive at home. There's a lot of concerns about, you know, if I can't see you, then how can I trust you? And, you know, Coffee House, because I only started hiring in January 2020, we've always been fully remote. And, you know, we've had to really learn how to trust people without like being able to look in their eyes every day, but, you know, looking at, say, the output of the work that they're doing and the feedback that we're getting from it, and, you know, having strong systems in place to ensure that what goes out the door is quality. But yeah, looking at output rather than, you know, even hours worked. So we don't even have like a hard start or end time. And I always forget like how much that shocks people. But I had a PA start recently, and she's like, so what time do I start? I was like, well, you know, in the morning, maybe like 9, 10, depends on like, you know, what you have on, and you know what time you want to, what time you need to start to be able to get stuff done. She's like, what time do I finish? I was like, probably around like 5, 6, depending on like, you know. She's like, and do I need to book time off if I want to go to the doctor? I'm like, no, you just go to the doctor. She's like, oh my God, like her last role, she had to literally be at her desk at 9 to 5, even though it was fully remote. And like, if she wasn't, she'd get in, you know, into big trouble for it. But I mean, why do you need a hard start time if, you know, the work's getting done and everything's getting done to high standard, and people are showing up for like the meetings that they're supposed to and are where they need to be when they need to be there? You know, what does it matter if they start at 8, 9, 10, 11? I mean, what does it actually matter if the work's getting done? And I think, you know, that level of trust, especially in remote working, but it's not common. And I forget about it because I live in this world where like we just trust people to get their stuff done.
Where do you think that comes from? What is it? Do you think it's because it was started in the pandemic, or do you feel like that's something that's inherently been part of your makeup as a leader is like, I'm hiring someone to do a job. Like I trust them to do a job.
A bit of both. I mean, I think in my early career, I remember I was a copywriter in an agency and I had to go into the office every single day. I had a young daughter. She was about 1 at the time. And one day I like finished everything, like absolutely everything by like 4 o'clock. So there was not a single thing to do. And they made me sit at the desk until 5 o'clock exactly, even though that could have been another hour that I had with my daughter. And I mean, there was no good reason for it. There wasn't, we were waiting for something, nothing. Like they did not have anything for me to do, and I had finished it. And, people work at different speeds as well. So I've always been incredibly quick, and I've always been good at managing multiple things. So, I mean, to be penalized for that and made to like sit at a desk.
Not rewarded for it.
Yeah. Was
which is nuts because you would have made them more profit because you worked quicker.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like just for context, like timesheets, right? Like I'm sure we operate on timesheets, and most agencies operate on timesheets. So if you get the job done by 4, that means you've saved the client and the agency an hour worth of billable time, which is profit. That's nuts.
Absolutely. I mean,
give it a bonus.
If all of your work's getting done and is getting done to high standard and is getting done. I mean, just because it takes you 2 hours to do something rather than 4 hours that it takes somebody else, then, you shouldn't be penalized for that. I mean, more experienced people should be able to do things quicker because you've been doing it for a lot longer than, somebody who's maybe doing something for the very first time.
And how do you manage the culture building at Copy House? Because I feel like so we come into the office twice a week. We have 2 core days. And obviously that's really important for us because we do things like this. Like we have to be in person to film. Like we've got clients that we do. We had a big filming day yesterday, which is really, really fun. But also I really value the importance of like looking at people and like being together. And I think, we're a slightly younger business than you guys, and the culture piece is really, really important to me. It's not so much trust. I actually think the guys get more done on the days that they're not in the office. I think being in the office is somewhat distracting, and actually, like Sam very rightly raised recently, that we shouldn't have any external meetings on office days. It should all be about collaboration and being together and like having fun and brainstorming and all that kind of stuff. And so we're rejigging some of our stuff internally to make sure that happens. But for me, as a business owner, it was so important that my team were together at least twice a week to make sure that we built that culture. How have you found doing that? Because obviously your approach has been completely different.
Yeah. It's been different but similar because we still make time for like in person, but kind of we operate on an as and when needed.
Right.
So like today we have 2 meetings this afternoon with clients.
So do you have an office that you can go to, or is it
we're going to them?
Okay.
But we also use the Chief Clubhouse until it closed recently to do our meetings at, but I'll be joining another private members club shortly. So we use a private members club to do meetings at if we need to host, but otherwise we go to them. But, we've got 3 or 4 team members in town today who are all coming to those meetings. So we kind of operate on a more as and when needed basis. So like all of our podcast recordings we do in person, all of our like strategy sessions we do in person, and then people travel in when they need to. At least once a quarter we do like an in-person team day together as well, and then in between that do online team building events. But kind of gives people a bit more freedom, because one of the things that happened during the pandemic was that the team we hired across the UK, so the team's quite spread out. So we've got people up in Edinburgh and in the Midlands, and that then makes it difficult. Like, I mean, part of me would love to, be in an office on a regular basis because I'm quite extroverted and really enjoy being around other people. But for, some of the team members to travel down from Edinburgh, say twice a week, would be not sustainable.
Yeah. And would probably impact their ability to be able to execute, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, instead creating moments where we can come together. I mean, we do like an online water cooler, like meeting where people can drop into and see each other and like have some informal conversation if they want. But yeah, we do have lots of, depends on the role as well, but we do have lots of time still together and in person. It's just less structured. So rather than having like specific days, it's kind of more on an as and when needed basis. And yeah, I mean, some roles are more likely to have more time in person. So like account managers, content strategists, that sort of thing, where like, copywriters might just do the quarterly in-person days, but most copywriters are super introverted as well. So perhaps don't want to be left alone and like head down and like big time to work. But yeah, that kind of works for us.
And how do you manage like those, like you said that you do quarterly socials? Like what does that structure look like to make sure that people are getting that time together and you are retaining amazing people. Because I feel like that is also a fear that a lot of employers have, is like, okay, remote, love the idea. Also, I'm so here for the like output over input concept. I think results are the only thing that matters. Effort doesn't actually matter that much. Like, obviously it's a great cliche quote to be like, you have to put in effort to get results. Of course you can. Like, it's so stupid. Like, it's like, if you want a cake, you got to put it in an oven. Like, it's how it works. But we care about the cake. We don't care about how long it takes to cook it,
Yeah.
But how have you kind of worked out like what works for you in terms of bringing everyone together, and like what does that look like? And
Well, we tend to do like part of the day of like working together. So it tends to be on like bigger things. So like last time we were working on like we reset the company values because we hadn't looked at the values in a little while and we had kind of like outgrown them and they weren't 100% right for where we were now. So, we did a session on values, and we did a session on like understanding our messaging and our positioning, because we're all kind of contributing to the marketing, but our positioning's changed slightly as we've grown, not drastically but changed a little bit. So yeah, did some like big collaborative working sessions together. So normally we spend like half of the day working and then the other half doing something social or fun. So last time we went out for dinner, and then we went and played mini golf.
Mate, I love days like that. They're always so fun. We try and do something around like that's not centered around alcohol, because I feel like when you're in an agency, it's so easy to be like, should we go to the pub on Thursday? And of course we still do that, because we have, we're right in the middle of basically like the advertising world, and there's lots of pubs around here. But we love doing stuff like the mini golf, and we did. Have you been to? Is it Fair Game in Canary Wharf? It's like a massive arcade for adults. It's amazing.
Yeah.
We've done puppy yoga
or darts. Or,
yeah.
I mean, there's lots of fun stuff that you can do without alcohol. I mean, I'm not a massive drinker, occasionally, but not as much as like some agency world. So yeah, do try to think about that. And we have people on the team who don't drink at all. So yeah, you definitely want them to feel included. And, not feel like they can't come because they're not going to drink. But yeah, I mean, activities are quite fun, and there's loads that you can do both online as well as like in person. And yeah, lots of ways to bring people together. I mean, a lot of our clients, especially, it's really common in the US to have distributed teams, because the US is so big that you do often end up with teams that are across states. And flying from New York to California is a 6-hour flight, so you end up like not being able to come together very often. So I mean, I see it in our clients as well, like having to create community online. But I mean, I think community comes down to communication. And if you can build a really good relationship with people without seeing them all the time. So I mean, my head of ops lives up in Edinburgh, so I don't get to see him maybe twice a quarter, but like I don't see him all of the time. But he's my best friend, and I mean, I talk to him literally every single day, even when like we even talk on the weekends and like when we're on holiday and stuff, because we really care about each other, especially. So I mean, I have a really, really strong relationship with him, but I mean, we've probably only been to like physically together in the same building, not very often, maybe 10 times a year or something. So you can have that strong relationship without being in person, but it's about communication and trust, and like having that kind of relationship. So like we fall out all the time because we're always disagreeing about like the best way to do stuff, but like we know that with us it's not personal. So like we can totally fight like siblings and like not agree at all about the best way to approach something, but it's never personal with us, and we're still best buds at the end of the day.
Do you think positive tension is a good thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because I think if you are surrounded by people who just agree with you, you're not going to go very far. I mean, it takes different viewpoints, but like respective different viewpoints. I mean, so it's about, it needs to come from the right place. So it's not necessarily like you're wrong, you're stupid, or like any of that like negative stuff, but more like, oh, I think we should do it this way. Well, I think we should do it this way. And like that negative or like that tension, then most of the time the answer is actually in the middle. So, I'm almost never right, or never 100% right about something. It's normally the answer's in the middle, because you see it from your perspective, but you're not seeing it from the operations perspective or from the client perspective, or from the creative team's perspective, because it's difficult to see stuff like when you're in the thick of things. It's difficult to see stuff outside of your lived experience,
your perspective. Yeah.
And I mean, the best things come from when you don't agree, because then, that's where it's quite interesting. I mean, I definitely don't want to be surrounded by people who just say yes to everything, because
I mean, you would
I'm
be
not
nowhere
right
near
about
it,
a lot of stuff.
And also, like, you can't grow if you only have yes, right? Like, you need people to challenge you on things. Otherwise, like, you're not the most important or intelligent person in the room. And I think, particularly when it's your business, I think you can be really passionate about these things, and sometimes that can come across as like, this is how we need to do it. It's like, actually, no, you need to tell me how you think we should do it. And then, like you said, like, sometimes, most of the time, it's somewhere in the middle. Especially when you're running a business, I feel like you have so many ideas, and like 99% of them is garbage, and you need someone to be like, this one's the good one. It's just like not focused on all these things.
Or I'm really good at ideas, but have no idea like how to actually implement them.
Yeah, right. You know where you want to be, but you don't know where to get from A to B. Yeah.
And if it's actually like a reasonable idea, or if it's kind of like a bit of a pipe dream. Got a lot of pipe dreams sometimes.
Yeah, but that's why you are where you are.
Yeah, and that's why like my head of ops is so essential, because he's like, yeah, that's a good idea. We can do it this way, this way, this way, and like actually makes it happen.
Yeah.
And that's why we're such a good team, because I've got the ideas and he's got the way to like actually
execute
get
it
there.
Yeah, that is the perfect yin and yang, isn't it? Like, you need the big thinker and then the like doer. I can't remember what book it is, but I read a book once, and it talked about a solid business being a bit like a dental practice. You need to have the dentist, the hygienist, and then the receptionist, and that trifecta is what makes the dental practice work, like humming, like just an engine running. So the dentist would be like the entrepreneur, like the big thinker, like, right, like, this is how we're going to make the teeth look, and da-da-da. So like us, you've got the receptionist, who's like the ops person, who's like, right, like, this is how we need to organize everything. Here's how we get it from A to B. Like, this is how many appointments this person needs, da-da-da. And then the hygienist is the person who's just making sure that everything is moving in the direction that it needs to be moving based on what the receptionist. And I was like, that is such a good analogy.
Yeah.
And it's very rare to find all of those skills in one person, which is why most businesses.
I don't think you would.
Yeah.
I don't think they exist in one person.
How do you find being I mean, you've obviously got your head of ops, and I have an operations director as well. So a lot of those skill sets that I lack, I have in the team, which is amazing. But I feel like it's quite lonely it can be quite lonely being a solo founder. How have you found it?
Yeah. I mean, it can definitely be lonely because, most people don't understand like the level of responsibility, and the buck really stops with you. So even when things go wrong, even when it's not something that you have done or even known about,
not
or
your fault, but still your
even
problem.
Controlled, sometimes you still have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So not your fault, but still your problem.
Yeah.
And you've still got to fix it, and you take a lot of responsibility for it. I mean, I've definitely found it lonely, but I've also counter that by investing a lot in myself and like establishing an identity outside of the company as well. So thinking about who I am outside of Coffee House, because when I first started it, they were very much entwined. I was a business, but now I don't really see myself that way anymore. And have lots of hobbies and friends and like things outside of work, and I particularly enjoy my friends who have no idea what I do, and even if they did, like, straight up don't care, because then it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of hobbies that massively help kind of create an identity outside of work as well. So,
Do you think that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't sacrifice yourself for the company. If you don't take yourself to the gym, if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't eat healthily or get enough sleep, or, look after your mental health, or look after your relationships, look after your family, nobody else is going to. Nobody's going to take your hand and lead you to the gym. You have to get your butt out of bed and go.
Yeah.
And you're so much better for it, but you have
and
to
your business
take
is better
care of
for
yourself
too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if your cup isn't full, you can't fill anybody else's.
It's taken me a really long time to work that out. Like, I think it's interesting that you said at the beginning of your career, as a founder, you also found that your entire identity was tied into business. Mine was too. I feel like I slept like shit, ate like shit, looked like shit for the first like 18 months to 2 years at least, because every single waking hour was just like clout. Where are we going? How are we getting there? How much money do we need? Like, and I had nothing outside of that, and I felt depleted. And it showed.
Yeah.
And it showed in my leadership. It showed in my physical appearance. It showed in my relationships deteriorating. It showed in everything. And part of me is like, I'm grateful for that, because I don't think I'd be where I am if I hadn't been all in at the beginning. But the other part of me is also like, that took a big chunk of my soul. And now I'm like, okay, work isn't everything. It's really important to me. And it's very important that we get to where we're going to go. And I take it really seriously. But actually, there is a whole other part of my life, which is also really important. And I think to your point about you're the one that needs to take yourself to the gym. You're the one that needs to take care of yourself. If your responsibility is looking after 25 people, your number one priority has to be you.
Yeah.
Because if you don't take care of you, who the hell is going to take care of all of those people? And you've got mortgages to cover. Like, it's a very serious responsibility.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you are only in control of so much as well. So, I mean, you can't sacrifice everything for something that is out of your control in a lot of ways. I mean, I had that experience during the pandemic because I started the company really in 2020. So, I mean, that perhaps exacerbated it as well because during the pandemic, there wasn't anything to do but work. So, I mean, I was working 80, 90 hours a week and my mental health was terrible. Like, I mean, it was the first time that I like really suffered badly from anxiety. And it was so bad that I like had a ball of anxiety on my chest and I named it Herbie because it just like would not go away. It just like lived
Oh my
here.
God.
It was terrible. Where like now, I know if I go to the gym, if I work out, if I like do my activities and like see my friends, like that anxiety dissipates. So like if I don't look after my mental health, it builds and it
You
builds
can
and
feel
it builds
it.
and it builds. Where if I'm, going to the gym every other day and like, taking care of myself physically and like having hobbies and friends and like having a life outside of work, then it kind of gets rid of it. So if I haven't been in like a week or so to the gym, then I feel it building and I feel Herbie coming back. So it's almost like a garden. If you don't look after it, you get weeds and like a total mess everywhere. Where if you do a little bit every day, if you're out there like pruning and cutting back, then you don't end up in such a bad place. But I mean, it's not sustainable. And I think one of the things I've come to learn is that like running a business is like a marathon. No marathon runner starts out the gate sprinting as fast as they possibly can because you won't make it to the end. Or running a business is a marathon. You're probably going to be in it for at least 10 years. If you're going to be in it for 10 years, you really have to think about how you're going to get there in the end in one piece. And sprinting out the gate is not going to get you where you want to be in the long run. So, I mean, it might be good at the beginning. You feel like you're making good progress, but it's not sustainable. And what you really need to think about is the long term and how you can sustain your health, your mental health, your family, your relationships over the next 10 years, not like this year.
It's like that long-term greedy mentality. And I just say that all the time, long-term greedy. I mean that from like not necessarily a money perspective, but like even little things like you said about going to the gym, like every day. If you go every day to the gym for a year, that's like a long-term greedy mentality of like, well, I know at the end of the year I'm going to look amazing. I'm going to feel amazing. I might not do it right now because I hate an ice bath and I really don't want to have to do cardio. But in a year's time, I'll look 10 out of 10.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to think long term. I think a lot of businesses, especially when they first get started, are very short-sighted because they're only thinking about like the here and now and the immediate problems, but aren't thinking about how they can get to where they want to go in the long term. And looking after yourself is definitely part of that.
And how do you balance and I feel like balance is like my most hated word because I feel like I envision this scale of like everything is perfectly like weighted, and that's just the reality of life is not like that at all. But how do you balance like being a mom with obviously like all of these incredible things that you're doing in your life and also then running this amazing business?
Yeah. I mean, I think I always think about it not as a balance, but as like an integration. Because, I will take off 3 hours in the middle of the day to go rock climbing, or I will, bring my daughter to work events even. So, I mean, it's more about integrating stuff together and because when you're an entrepreneur, you're pretty much working all of the time. And, you might get a really good idea at like 10 o'clock at night and need to like go do something, but you also can't work all of the time. So it's making time when you can for things and making yourself a priority in that as well. So if it means getting up at 7 to go to a spin class, doing that so that you can get it in before your day starts. But it's kind of more of an integration, I think, and thinking of it not as like 8 hours working, 8 hours off, 8 hours sleeping, but like how can all of that time work together so that you can achieve the most. And then, I mean, as well for me, a lot of it is delegation and having a good team around me to support me and help me achieve more over quite a short period of time. So, having a PA and having marketing manager, and having a team who like, I mean, they do a lot of it. And, you know, most of the time it's just a matter of me then showing up. But when you have a team that supports you, and I mean, an external network that supports you as well. So, I mean, my husband is, incredibly supportive and does a lot of, you know, helps a lot with our daughter. He does a lot of it. You know, it's about working together to achieve the aim, whether it's growing the business or raising a family or, you know, whatever it is in life, you can't do it on your own.
One of the things that I found the most, I really used to struggle with the balance thing because I'd feel guilty, like if I was on my phone after 5, or I'd feel anxious if I was having to think about the kids when I was at work, and I couldn't find that. Like, I was striving for the balance that everyone tells me that I should have been having, but it just felt like I was fighting this kind of losing battle. There's a tongue sticking out, and Oscar's fallen asleep. This losing battle. And it was when I started thinking about, and I love that you said integration, but not stressing about answering something after 5. And like you said, like I might shoot an email out at 3 a.m. in the morning sometimes, but I'll schedule it so that it doesn't land into the team's inbox until 8:50 or something. And it was, as soon as I stopped fighting trying to make it balanced, was when everything started to feel like in flow. So I don't necessarily, I love that you said you take like 3 hours, you know, out of the day, because like that's what you want to do, and that's what's going to make you operate at like the optimum level, because that night you're probably going to be like, some people are night people, right? Like you said, I'm sure you've got lots of copywriters who operate best at night. And that might be when all the ideas come. But if you're going to be working at night, you also then need to replenish yourself during the day.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that like guilt comes from external pressure as well. Like people who think.
Do you feel pressure as a mum, you know, running a business externally?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of judgment in the world about what that looks like and what that nuclear family looks like. So, I mean, my husband and daughter live up in Scotland and I live here, and we kind of have a split life between the two because I need to be here for work, but I go up there on weekends, and like, doesn't fit in your normal idea of what that should look like. And you get a lot of judgment for it, but it doesn't mean that I'm less of a mom or less of a wife or any of these things. It just means that our life looks different from somebody else's life. And there's a lot of pressure and judgment externally from people on like, they want you to have a life that looks like what they think it should look like. And that's where that mom guilt comes from as well. Like, they think that you should not be on your phone after 5, or that you should be at all the school plays. You know, well, somebody should be at
because
the school
that's what
plays,
a good
but
mom
it doesn't
does.
have to be you. I mean, why can't your partner be the one at the school play? Or, I mean, we've even asked like a grandma or an aunt or an uncle to like be there if we both can't be there. But like, I mean, I have just become really comfortable with the decisions I make in my life. And, you know, it's not for anybody else, my parents or anybody else, to say what that should look like. But if you're happy with the decisions and if it's right for you and your family, then like, well, screw everybody else.
I love that. That's true confidence and happiness is not going, will they like me and will they like my decisions? It's like, I'll be fine if they don't.
Yeah. Well, and I don't even need them to. So I've learned to like not even think about it really. But, you know, the people who know you get it and like get, you know, why you might make certain decisions and make pretty much anything work. I mean, I've even gotten a lot of judgment lately for like getting a dog because I travel all the time.
Oh, really?
But yeah, seriously. But
I mean,
you know,
he's 10 out of 10 choice from my perspective.
but
if
he
you
can
care.
travel with me, or you know, he can stay with family. But you know, it's not even anybody else's decision, and you can make your life anything you want it to be. But you don't need to play by anybody else's rules. You can play by your own rules.
You obviously run a content creation agency, and I believe that everyone should write every day. Like, I think it's a skill that so many people don't have, but it's actually a skill that influences every single part of your life. Like, even just down to the things of like writing an email or trying to influence someone into doing something. I think writing helps people know how to communicate, and communication is the absolute bedrock of everything in life. How did you get into it, first of all? You know, in terms of like the actual storytelling piece, not necessarily your career. And secondly, do you think it's really important that everyone knows how to communicate and write, and how can people learn that skill?
Yeah. I mean, I have been writing my whole entire life.
Did you enjoy that as a kid? Like, were you reading?
Yeah. And I used to write children's stories for my dad when I was like 5 and 6. My parents still have some of them. But I mean, I have 2 degrees in literature. And like, I mean, I was a kid in school that knew where the library was and would spend my summers with my nose in a book. And I've always got a book on the go. I've got a tattoo that's like a writing quill on my shoulder because, yeah, it's something that I've always done. It's always come natural to me. So writing and words have always been my superpower. And I mean, I still write today. I mean, I just finished writing a book. I wrote about 50,000 words in 2 months.
I know you said that before we started recording. I was like, that just fell out of you.
Yeah, completely. But I mean, I certainly write every day, and it's definitely a skill, you know, being able to communicate and express your viewpoint and like influence other people to believe in your idea is essential for running and growing a business. I mean, it's a really good skill to have. I don't think a lot of people necessarily do have it, and especially if you're more analytical. So, I mean, I'm thinking about accountants and finance people are not.
But even those people, they need to know
not
how
typically
to sell,
good at
right?
it. But yeah, I mean, being able to. There's a book called "To Sell Is to Human" because it's really about influencing, and you know, sales is not buy this thing, but you know, believe in this idea and let me help you, and you know, let's go in this direction together rather than you know, spend X amount of money.
Everything's sales though. Dating
literally
is sales.
Everything. Yes.
Trying to convince your kid to eat broccoli is sales. Like hiring and, you know, both selling yourself to a prospective employee and vice versa to an employer is sales. Everything is sales. Sales is not a dirty word. I think it's one of the most underrated skills that anyone can have.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely true. This whole book is about how sales is about influencing others and, yeah, convincing them, even if it's, you know, getting your kid to eat broccoli or, I mean, and the best salespeople don't even know that they're salespeople.
And often the best sales are like the person being sold to doesn't even realize they're being sold to, because that is how fluid it is. It's so organic and it's a connection more than a, like you said, give me your credit card, like a resonance.
Yeah, I mean, teachers are salespeople. Or my husband's he's a mental health social worker, and he is so good at convincing people what to do and getting them to think that it's their idea, because it's much easier to get somebody who's mentally unwell to take their medication if they think it's their idea rather than they're being told to do it. So, I mean, all of that is sales. It's basically convincing somebody to do something that they maybe otherwise would not have done.
Yeah, which brings really nicely onto what Copy House does, which is to help organizations like basically translate really complex ideas simply, right? Which is the basis of sales. What I guess brands listening to this, or people running a business, or even people working in any department within an organization, how important is it for companies to be able to do that? Because I think there are a million different ways in which you can communicate your message, particularly in the digital age we're working in right now. You've got social media, you've got blogs, you've got newsletters, you've got TV, or all of these different mediums in which companies can use to get their message out there. But where does it all start? Because I feel like what you guys do is very, very powerful, but very simple. So where can a company or a person start with getting their message out there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our brands definitely struggle with this before they come to us because they're often working in these really complex industries and they're really technically minded people. So they're the accountants or the CFOs or CTOs who set up a business and, you know, have a really brilliant idea, but live in that idea all day, every day. So they get what I call a knowledge gap, where they don't understand what their audience doesn't understand. You know, they think that everybody understands it to the level and in the degree that they do, but almost nobody does, because if they did, they wouldn't need you. So like what we often do is act as that bridge. So, I mean, the first thing to be able to communicate that message externally is to understand your audience. Who is it that you're speaking to? And what is their current level of understanding on that topic? I mean, it's not always about making it as simple as possible, because if you're speaking to another CTO, you know, they probably will have a decent level of understanding, but they're not going to understand your company or your product like you do, because you do that
jargon
all day, every day, you know. So even a CTO who is very educated, very experienced in the world of technology is not going to understand it to the same level and the same degree. So, you know, it's always starting with looking at that audience and who they are, and like really spending time to get to know them and like, you know, put yourself in their shoes and to document this, and then building the strategy from there. So we always start with the audience, and then, perhaps looking at competitors in the market, but it always comes back to who you're trying to speak with.
And do you think that's the basis of all marketing?
Yeah, massively. I mean, it's the basis of all communication. I mean, if you're trying to get your child to eat broccoli, I mean, explaining all the nutritional benefits of broccoli is probably not going to work. I mean, telling them, making it into a fun story, which is their level of understanding, will work, which is why like airplane rides work to feed kids things that they don't want to eat. All marketing, all conversations, all relationships comes back to who you're trying to get to do that particular thing. I mean, I now, outside of Coffee House, do fractional like CMO work, and I always, when I'm building a marketing strategy, always start there because it determines what channels you should be on. It determines how much budget you need to spend. It determines everything. Everything comes back to that. I call it fishing where the fishes are. It's so much easier to go to your audience where they already are and spend time with them on the channels that they are already on than trying to get them to come to you. And yeah, really thinking about it as relationship building and, making it a two-way street.
I always think successful, like back in the day, right? When you look at even like Mad Men as like a great example, like the whole concept of that type of marketing was always like, let's talk at consumers and get them to buy what we're selling. Whereas actually I think the most effective marketing is talking with consumers from like within those communities. And it's funny because I always hate it when I see like TikToks and Instagrams and LinkedIn where it's like, you should be posting on TikTok. It's the best channel for you to be on, or LinkedIn's the best channel for you to be on. But actually there is no best channel. There's just the best channel that you can go and find your audience at.
Yeah,
And I
it's
think
where
knowing
your
where they
audience
are.
is spending
Yeah.
time. I mean, because almost no brands need to be on all the channels, but this like in the community marketing you see with personal branding as well. So when we talk to our clients about personal branding, we try to identify who in their organization is a mirror match for their target audience. So if you're trying to target CFOs, building the personal brand of your CFO is a really good idea because your CFO is going to speak a language that the head of sales or even the CEO is not going to speak. They understand that audience naturally and intrinsically way more than anybody else in the company, and already have that trust and already have that network as well. Often they have a network that they've built through their careers that is dormant until you start to get quite active and build their brand, and then you can tap into that audience. So using that mirroring technique to kind of basically show your audience, we understand you, we get you, we're like you.
And that resonance thing I think is really underrated. It's funny because obviously I run a personal branding agency, but I don't talk about personal branding that much. I talk about the stuff that is going to connect with the people I'm trying to attract, which is typically like, so we have three kind of customers, if you like. We've got employers, we've got founders, and then we've got individuals. So employers will be people who need to, get talent, like attract talent, retain talent, engage talent, like within their organization. We've got founders who obviously want to like get brand awareness, like win new customers, probably also hiring, legacy planning, funding, exits, all those things. Then we have individuals who might be people who work within an organization or a business who want to get ahead in their career. They want that external opportunities, but also internal ones maybe, because, a huge byproduct of personal branding that people don't realize, particularly in larger organizations, is it gets you visibility at the top table. Like if your name is in a room with a board being like, oh, did you see what Kathryn posted? I thought that was really cool. That means that the CEO now knows who you are and otherwise would have no idea. And people don't really think about these things. And so there are three buckets, if you like, but all three of those buckets have got completely different pain points and completely different levels of education about like what personal branding is and like how it can impact their life and all of those things. And so I often find that our employer clients come to us because of the content I put out about running a team, the challenges of running a business, like cash flow problems, like all the things that are my life, like, and yours too, running a business, because that creates resonance. But then the individuals within a business who might, not necessarily resonate with the founder content will resonate with me being like, I've failed a million times and like it sucks when you do, but like it's amazing when you get out the other side because you learn it. Like, and it's all of that human stuff because we all have that version of failure or fuck ups or like whatever it might be. How can brands take that concept and apply it to their marketing strategy?
I think it's about understanding your audience regardless. So, I mean, for us, we tend to target a lot of like marketing managers and CMOs, but, thinking about them as full humans rather than like just somebody in a role. So, they often have hobbies or interests that are quite similar across the board. The personality of somebody who's in a CTO or a CFO or a CM role, they tend to share similarities regardless of the organization that they work at. So, thinking about who that person is and, how you can kind of connect with them both in work, but also outside of work. So, maybe like for us, a lot of our audiences are female. So, talking about my daughter and my work is quite a good way to connect with them on like a human level. Or perhaps it's juggling the work life balance and kind of really understanding who they are and what they need, both from like a brand but also to get ahead in their career. So there's a personal element of it even when you're doing B2B.
It's funny because I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think there's two things here. I don't really believe there is B2B and B2C. Like, if you really think about marketing at its core, to me, it's human to human. And it doesn't matter whether you're selling to a business or to a consumer, there is a person behind that business who's making that buying decision. So, you were talking there about building the personal brand of your CFO because that's who you're appealing to. That's because the person behind that buying decision is a human being that's going to relate back to that CFO, surely. And so when you look at it through that lens, you no longer think about this like business jargon of like everything has to be really formal and everything has to be really serious and everything has to be really clever. And then actually start looking at it from a lens of like, how can we make that person behind that buying decision feel like they're seen, heard, understood, and that what I'm selling them actually is solving a problem that they might not even realize that they have.
Yeah, I mean, I get it a lot in B2B because people often think that B2B doesn't need to be emotive, that you don't have to understand your audience's pain points or like connect with them on an emotional level or even have like customer avatars sometimes. But in the B2B world, I mean, I often say that the B2B world is actually more emotive than the B2C because you're making decisions that are more expensive, more complex, at higher risk. If you make the wrong decision, you could quite easily lose your job. Where, if you buy the wrong pair of shoes in B2C, you're probably not going to lose your job by buying the wrong pair of shoes. So the weight of decisions in the B2B world is much heavier. And I think 9 times out of 10, what people are awake thinking about in the middle of the night is actually work and not their personal life. So there's so much stress and emotion and like tension that goes into the B2B buying decision making process where you don't get the same level in B2C. So I think emotions and understanding the psychology of your audience and what they're struggling with is perhaps even more important.
You mentioned a minute ago about like, you sharing like being a mom and like the stuff with your daughter and stuff often gets like a real resonance with the people that you're trying to attract. I found you through your personal brand, and I love that kind of content. I think it makes me laugh when people on LinkedIn particularly go, "This isn't Facebook," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's not," which is great. Like, I love that we can be human beings on LinkedIn. I love that people are sharing their true selves on the platform now as part of building a professional brand, because you're a professional, like whether you have children or not. You're a professional whether you have a dog in the podcast or not. Like, these are all things that make us human, and it's that human connection that makes us interesting and other people interested in us and vice versa. Do you find that sharing that type of content makes like a bigger difference in terms of like your company brand awareness, like that real personal stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's always like a bit of a balance to be struck between like how much personal stuff you share versus like how professional you like what you talk about
Do you think there's a
professionally.
line?
Yeah. I tend to think about it like the things that I would naturally talk about at work. So, I might not talk about like the big party I had on Saturday and the hangover I had after. I probably wouldn't talk about that like with my employees. So, it's probably not a good idea to share that on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But, I probably would talk about, going to Cyprus, which I did just the other week, or like getting my dive certificate, or like, which are things that you might naturally class as far more personal, but you are probably telling people about those things in like your day-to-day work conversations
It's like that water cooler stuff.
Yeah. And, thinking about the stories that you're already naturally telling. So what are you already naturally telling people about? And, that is normally really good content.
Yeah. It's funny actually, because I always say, I'm so glad that like we're on very similar thought process with this. I always say to people, they go, how personal should my personal brand be? And I always say a good acid test is how would you communicate with your favorite employee or your favorite client? Like, what's the kind of rapport that you would build with them? You'd probably ask them about their kids. You might remember their kid's birthday. You might, you know, have a shared interest in rugby or like whatever it might be, but you probably wouldn't tell them the political rant that you had in the pub with your friend on a Friday night, because that might make them feel a bit uncomfortable. Like
Yeah.
you might not like, you know, there's the whole thing of like the crying CEO on LinkedIn. Like you probably wouldn't cry in front of your team. Like you might, like no judgment if you do, but I wouldn't cry in front of my team, and so I probably
Not
wouldn't then
normally.
share that. Yeah, well, it depends. It depends on what the week's been like. We've
Not
definitely had some
normally.
moments where I've definitely wanted to. But I feel like that's a really good acid test of particularly personal branding content, of like, how do you, I wonder sometimes whether there's a lot of pressure on people to post content and therefore they feel like they need to post that kind of stuff. It's like the sympathy likes, right? Personal branding is really important. So like, let's be super, super vulnerable and share that out there. But the thing that sort of misses out is like, it might get you loads of engagement because people resonate with it, but you've also got to think about how that makes you look like long term. Like, does anyone really want to work with a CEO that's crying on LinkedIn? Does that, when therefore what message that send to your team? You know, I feel like there is a, like you said, a balance, a line to be struck between the two.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's about being authentic as well. So, I mean, if you're authentically and normally quite a vulnerable person, or like, you know, often talk about, I don't know, your mental health struggles or like any of these things, then that naturally translates to LinkedIn. But I think the biggest problem is when you're not authentically like that off of LinkedIn. So if it's not something that you would normally talk about, if you don't normally share lots of information about your personal health or like any of these sorts of things, then you probably shouldn't talk about it on LinkedIn as well. Which is why, like, thinking about stories that you tell in your normal life. So, I mean, if it's something that you're really passionate about but requires you to be more vulnerable, then yeah, absolutely, you know, go ahead and share that on LinkedIn. But if you are not normally that person, and that was a problem with the crying CEO, is that it wasn't authentic and it was tone deaf to like the situation, which is like, he probably definitely wasn't also doing it in person.
Because context, he had to like get rid of a bunch of
Yeah.
his team, didn't he? And then he posted a picture of himself crying, saying how sad it was that he had to do that. And it's like, you're the CEO of the company, you just let half your team go and you're the one crying.
Yeah. So I mean, it's tone deaf. It's not like reading the room, where like most people naturally know how to read a room. So probably he wasn't doing that offline, and that's probably the bigger problem with it, rather than like crying on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you are natural about what you are posting, then it translates quite well and it is authentic. The problem is when it's not authentic.
Do you think building your founder brand has helped influence the growth of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have built my whole career through my personal brand, because my very first freelance client found me on LinkedIn and asked me to do some like freelance copywriting work, and that was the first time that I thought, oh wow, like maybe I can actually build something through this. And I mean, almost everything that's happened in the business has come by my personal brand in some shape or form. I mean, obviously the personal brand is now like extended off of LinkedIn to include lots of things like the podcast, and I include my networking in that as well. So I try to meet like 50 new people every month.
I love that.
And I've done that for about 2 years. And I built a lot of my early career through that, because I used to just email people and ask if they'd go for a coffee with me, and then, you know, ask them if they knew anybody else I should talk to. And like that created that like really early momentum, even long before I even had an agency, back when I was just looking to get like my first role in marketing. So, you know, that personal branding's been a part of everything in some shape or form. But yeah, it's definitely something that I can directly contribute to the success of the business, 100%.
What advice would you give to someone who's listening to this who is convinced that personal branding is a good thing, but like doesn't know where to start?
I think a lot of people don't start with personal branding because they want everything that they put out there to be absolutely perfect. And like, I think you have to accept that not everything's going to land. And even when you've been doing it for a really long time. So, I mean, I've probably been posting at least 4 times a week for 5 years. I mean, I'll occasionally do posts that like don't get the traction that I think that they will. And, you know, you don't always know what's going on with your audience, and, you know, if they're maybe not online that day, or like, you know, if it just doesn't land the way that it should. So I mean, even when you've been doing it for a really long time, not everything is 100% perfect. You still make mistakes, or not even big mistakes, but, you know, you still post content that maybe doesn't get, you know, hundreds of likes or any of these sorts of things. And I mean, I think it's letting go of that and just getting started. I mean, it's far better to get started than to let perfection stand in the way of progress.
I mean, the outcome shouldn't be the goal, right? It should be the things that you take to get to the outcome. I always feel like, what is the outcome with my personal brand? Like, I don't know. I don't know what the goal is with it, but I know what I want to achieve, and I know what the little dial move is that I can do every single day is going to help me get to. I love that you spoke about networking, because I feel like that's something that, particularly if we go full circle all the way back to our conversation about like remote work and stuff, it's something that I think can really hamper a lot of people's careers. I don't think they really realize how, the whole concept of like your network is your net worth. Like, it's not like that is huge, but also if you can pair that with people knowing you and you being known, like the personal branding piece, as well as you being proactive and like I'm going to steal that, by the way, 15 people a month. I love that. That can supercharge your career massively. How did you get the confidence to like just message that first person and be like, hey, can I go for a coffee with you?
Well, my Ned at the time, who was advising the business, set me that target of meeting 50 new people a month. I mean, and how I've gone about that has changed massively over time. So, I mean, these days it's a lot easier to achieve that because I can go to one event, meet 10 new people,
Yeah,
quite easily. So, if I go to 4 events a month,
you've met your
then
target.
yeah. Where back then, it was September 2020, so everything was fully online. So I joined communities and like reached out to people within those communities to ask if they wanted to go for a coffee, and also joined like this online networking platform that used to match you. And then I would introduce people that I met to other people I knew, and then they'd naturally make introductions for me, and like building that reciprocity. I mean, as I've like matured in my networking, I've learned about the 3 I's. So every time that I meet somebody, I try to introduce them to somebody else or invite them to something or provide some information that might be helpful.
Yeah.
So, you're trying to give value to the person that you meet. And it doesn't always have to be via introductions. There's lots of ways that you can give that value. But, building that relationship. And yeah, I mean, I guess initially, like, I never really had difficulty with the confidence to like ask somebody for a coffee. I mean, I've always had a mentality of like, what's the worst that can happen?
I love that. Where does that come from, do you think?
Probably from my dad, because my dad's an entrepreneur. So I grew up in a household that was full of like that growth mindset. And that's part of that is, what's the worst that can happen? And, I'm currently coaching somebody on setting up their agency and set a target for them to reach out to 15 people to ask for coffee. And like they've been
I love that same target.
Yeah. Well, I do 50 and
Oh,
I've
50.
sent
Okay,
them
fine.
15.
Yeah.
And they, have been really nervous about it. But I'm like, well, what's the worst that can happen? If you ask somebody for a coffee, nobody's going to get mad at you for it. They might say no, or they might ignore you. But like, I mean, what's literally the worst that could happen by asking somebody to go for a coffee?
I mean, and also if you think about even the statistics of that, you ask 15 people, at least 5 will probably say yes.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
5 conversations that you otherwise wouldn't have had.
And I'm trying to get her to build that momentum. And that's how you build that momentum of like having lots of mini sparks. I mean,
10-second conversations, like
yeah, because sales and generating leads is a bit of a game of chance, because you never know who actually needs that work. So there's some strategy you can do behind it. But the thing with chance is the more you do something, the bigger your numbers, the more likely you are to find that opportunity. So, if you only have 2 coffees a month, the chances of one of those 2 people needing your support from a sales perspective or having an opportunity for you are relatively slim. Where if you meet 50 or 100 people a month, the chances of somebody within that 50 or 100 needing help or having a project for you or having an opportunity for you are far greater. So, I mean, all good gamblers know this, that the more you play and the bigger your numbers, like the more likely you are to win. So when you're playing with chance and when you're playing the odds, you want to do it in volume, which is why networking at a bigger scale then makes sense.
It's funny because I was on a webinar live stream yesterday with LinkedIn, and we were talking about future-proofing your pipeline and creating future pipeline, not just from a sales perspective, from an opportunity perspective. And we were saying about how posting content and networking and all that kind of stuff might not give you anything right now, but actually, and to your point, it's all about giving at that point. It's like, what can I give to someone to be valuable and interesting and create some kind of connection with them? Because I know that in the future, that's going to create something for me. And I think a lot of people look at blogs and like copy and that type of marketing is like, well, why are we bothering to do that? And what they don't understand is you're future proofing your business and you're future proofing your marketing, you're future proofing yourself, if it's through personal branding and posting content on LinkedIn, through like even the example of blogs, SEO, like that compounds massively over time. Same with your personal brand, like that one post that you did 5 years ago when you first decided to like hit send on LinkedIn has compounded into 4 posts a week, which now means that you're getting all this business off the back of your personal brand. There's 50 people that you're meeting every single week, might not every single month, might not happen to anything this month, but like in a year's time, the 50 people that you met this month might turn into 20 new business opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think it's like looking at that long-term greedy kind of mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it does, all brand building activities take time and are a long-term investment, but do ultimately pay off. I mean, we just closed a deal this week from a brand who I think I've been in conversations with them for about 2 years. Over a year ago,
That must feel like a relief.
They came to CMO Roundtable that I hosted. And then about 3 months after that, went for coffee with them. And then about 2 months after that, they introduced me to somebody else in the company. And then now randomly, this week, just emailed and, had a immediate need. Only 3% of people are ever actually in the active buying stage. So if only 3% of people are in the active buying stage, then you need that pool to be able to like have actual numbers coming through. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll talk to somebody and it will be like literally 2 years later that they come in and they have a deal. And, the person who's come in, I've never even met before, but is somebody from a different department that they were recommended by the person who I had coffees and invited to the CMO Roundtable to come speak with us. So that project's getting underway this week, which is great. But yeah, I mean, it takes time. In B2B, I mean, the average sales cycle is 6 to 12 months. And if you're working with a 6 to 12 month sales cycle, then yeah, you've got what you're doing now, the sales that you're closing today were actually conversations you were maybe having a year ago, if not even longer.
And I love that you've brought up that kind of like situational awareness, right? When we think about, I think it's the HubSpot pie graph of consideration is where I initially saw this concept a couple of years ago, and I love it, which is I think it's about 80% of your audience at any one time have got no interest in speaking to you, no need, no requirement, whatever. There's about 17% who are thinking that they might have a problem. They might even know they have a problem, but they don't really know how to fix it. And they're like looking for a solution. But it's only that 3% who are actually actively buying. And the problem is with marketing generally and sales generally is everyone is peppering that 3%, which means it's oversaturated. No one actually wants to hear from you and they're completely overwhelmed with noise, and therefore it's very difficult to cut through that. Whereas if you build like that future pipeline, right, that brand with the people before they even get to the stage of knowing they have a problem, you're going to be the first person they come to. And I think that is something that people don't value enough in not just marketing, but like their career. Like if you want to be a CMO one day, like what are you doing in that 80% of the potential networking that you could be doing of like, you're not ready for that job yet, you're ready to move, you're not ready for that position, but what are you doing in that 80% that could mean that when, the 3% of the companies that are hiring or the 3% of the top companies that you want to work for are ready to take someone like you, like know about you and want to speak to just you.
Yeah, well, and quite often too, like when you make a change and when you level up in your career and go to the next, get a promotion, it's because somebody believes in you. If you are reliant on like only the people in your organization believing in you, then your chances are even slimmer. Where if you have people externally who also believe in you, who are willing to take that chance on you and give you perhaps a role that you haven't had previously, then your odds of getting there are much greater. I mean, I think people often don't think about or realize the amount of jobs that aren't even ever advertised. So there's a massive percentage of jobs that never even get advertised on LinkedIn or on any job platform because they're hired people that they know. So that's where networking comes in. I mean, if I had to, and I've had a lot of jobs, like a lot of friends on the job market this year with all the redundancies that have happened. And, if I had to find a job tomorrow, I would be contacting my network. So having built a network and then doing personal branding, and that's far more effective. I mean, to get people to come to you to say, I've got this opportunity, do you want it? Rather than having to apply and be in a pool of hundreds of candidates for that position. I mean, when you're looking at a pool of hundreds of candidates, and I've done a lot of recruitment, so I've seen this from the other side. I mean, on paper, so many people look great. So how do you actually stand out then? I mean, if you've got 20 applications of people who have very similar backgrounds and you've got one role, I mean, your chance of getting that job is so slim. Where if you already know them, if you already have that relationship, if they already know you're great, then you're the safe option. I mean, recruitment and hiring always carries a degree of risk, because even when you do, 5-stage interviews, which we definitely don't do, but even when you do, you can't guarantee that that person's going to be a good hire. And the only way you can really guarantee if somebody's going to be a good hire is if you already know them, you already have that relationship with them. So it massively de-risks it. I mean, I'm part of the Chief community, which is a community of like really high-powered women. And, one of the things that they do every single time that they are applying for a job is they figure out who they know in that company, and go out to the network and ask, does anybody know anybody at this brand? Can you introduce me? Can you like make a recommendation? Because that is how you like stand out from a pool of applicants.
It's about like, and that is personal branding. Like I think a lot of people think that personal brand is like just post content on LinkedIn, just post content on YouTube, like whatever it might be. But actually it's all of those things. It's who is talking about you in a room that you're not in, and it might look like that. It's about, when you're looking for a job, positioning yourself as the candidate, not a candidate amongst many, like the choice, not just a choice amongst many.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where those relationships come in, and where personal branding and having a network comes in. I think it's so much easier to find a job and find a job opportunity if you are positioned as the choice. And whether that's the choice to deliver a specific service or the choice for the next hire, you want to be the only person that they're thinking about.
Which leads me really nicely to your book about branding.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. Like you said, you wrote that in like 2 months.
Yeah, I did. I wrote a book, and I just signed the contract with a publisher, which is
really amazing,
exciting.
By the way. So many books never get publishers, so that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. But I've written a book on building brand awareness, and like everything that you need to think about if you're building brand awareness, either for the first time or building it into new market or around a new product. But it follows like the trajectory of what I've done with Copy House. So it's lots of practical advice, but it's peppered with lots of personal stories around things that we've done right and things that we've done wrong, like hiring the wrong marketing manager at the beginning. But it's all those insights that you need if you're thinking about building brand awareness.
I love that. Well, why a book? I mean, it's a stupid question, because like, why not? But like, what made you think like, I need to do a book on this?
Well, I have always wanted to write a book. I mean, words are my thing. So I grew up surrounded by books. I mean, I never really thought that I would write a whole book. I never thought that I would be able to find the time, or that I'd, even had enough really to say. But, I realized that was kind of a self-limiting idea, because of course I could write a book. And if you really want something, you can do it. So I worked with a publisher before Christmas, and I knew that I had a window between Christmas and New Year where we had a week where like nothing was really happening, and January's a slow month as well in agency world, so like, let's hit this hard. So I created the outline and like had everything prepped and ready to go, and started writing the book the day after Christmas, and had a target of writing 3,000 words every day. And that allowed me to do it so quickly. So I mean, having a big goal and then breaking it down into steps, and like, if you really want something, it's definitely achievable. But that big idea might seem like a really big idea, but if you break it down into smaller sections, so can you do 2 hours a day? Okay, cool. Then do 2 hours every day until you get there. You don't have to write it all in one day. But yeah, I'm really proud of it, and I'm really excited for it to come out.
Have you got an outline of like when it might come out yet?
Probably this summer.
That's very exciting. I can't wait.
We're gonna do a book tour.
You have to send me a copy. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I will. We're gonna do a book tour around the US. And use the Chief clubhouses, and I think as well. There's not much business value in this, but I'm gonna bring it to my hometown and bring it to the little local library that I grew up going to.
That is such a full circle moment.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You're going to bring your daughter with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really cool. Because you were saying before we started recording that like your daughter comes to like all of your events and all of that kind of stuff. That's going to make her like mega, mega proud of mom.
Yeah, yeah. I love bringing her to things. I love showing her that, you can have a career and you can be, a high power executive. It's incredible to like just have her know that that's an option.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to do it, but you can if you want
Yeah.
to.
And I think that is, and I think that you've just nailed that on the head. It's like everyone can. Like you don't have to, but you can. And I think the choice, the freedom of choice, is what a lot of people don't realize is even available. You said, you always thought that you weren't going to write a book. Well, like, why can't you? Like, I never thought that I'd be running a company. Why can't I? Like, you can do anything you want. And I think thoughts are really powerful things. And if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. And I think it sounds to me like you're passing that on to your daughter in like the most incredible way.
Yeah, I hope so. That's the goal.
It's always the goal, right? I hope I'm passing that on to my kids. I don't think my daughter would want to run a business though. Like she's so funny. She really like enjoys praise. And so she's a really good student because, she wants the A star. She wants the pat on the back. My son could care less whether you think he's doing a good job or not. So I think he's the little Tasmanian devil that's probably going to be like unemployable when he's older because he's not going to want anyone to tell him what to do, which is really quite challenging as a parent, but like very, very motivating as an adult, being like, you're going to be amazing, but also could you please eat your broccoli? If you could just, I always say to everyone, I've got this big neon sign above my desk in the office that says just fucking post it because that's how I live my life. I'm like, just fucking do it. Like, I love when you said earlier, like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Because that is literally my mentality about everything. And sometimes it frustrates my team to hell because I'm like, well, what's the worst that could happen? And they're like, well, maybe like quite a few things. Just white knuckling it through life. But if there was anything that you could just, effing post or just effing do or just effing say, what would it be? Like, what is your core, like, no consequences? What are you doing? What are you saying?
Well, I think it's everything I'm doing right now because that's exactly how I live
love
my
that.
life. I mean, my what's the worst that can happen is, I say it to my friends when we're on the ski mountain, like, why can't we do that double black diamond? Let's go. Like, what's the worst that's gonna happen? So
Die.
I mean,
We're gonna do that anyway.
but what's the worst that's gonna happen? So
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's clearing my mask under 20 feet of water, or skiing off piste, or taking that risk in business. I mean, there's nothing in my life that I want to do that I'm not doing.
I love that.
I've done it.
I love that.
I mean, getting the puppy was the most recent. I've wanted a puppy for a while, but I was like, well, how am I going to manage everything? I'm like, well, what's the worst that can happen?
You'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'll figure
Everything
it out.
works out.
Yeah.
Everything.
So I don't think I actually have anything because I'm literally doing everything that I want to do. I'm not one of these people that wants to do something and doesn't do it.
I think that's a very inspiring way to live. What is next for Copy House and for Kathryn?
Well, we're massively expanding into the US this year.
That's so exciting.
Which is really exciting. I really love I'm from there originally, and I really love like being back in the US market. So we grew 30% into the US, and this year it's target of 50-50, and we're getting there quite quickly, which is great. So establishing the brand in a new market, bringing it to the US with events and the podcast, and really building brand awareness in a whole new market, which is really fun and exciting. And continuing to grow the company. The big thing for me this year is obviously the book. But I'm really excited for this year.
And what is your thing for your personal life? It sounds like you like have some incredible stuff that you've got going on, and you live like very intentionally, which I think is really inspiring.
Well, I've just picked up a couple new hobbies because I just learned how to scuba dive. So
That's
I need to
amazing.
plan another couple dive trips. Just started doing spin classes as well, which is so much fun. And I just got a brand new puppy.
Who's been very well behaved, by the way.
Who I'm trying to, get used to my life and way of living. But he's going to be a work dog for sure.
He's so cute. And he's been so good through this podcast. So and it's a long time for a small puppy to sit still. It's like, we've got kids and you're trying to make them sit still for 2 hours. So well done, Chief Marketing Officer. He's done a very good job. Look, thank you so, so much for being a part of the Branded Podcast and for just being so open and honest about everything. I think I've wanted to have this conversation for a really long time, and I could have kept talking to you for another 3 hours. But thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure.